The alien city was unlike anything David had ever seen. Towering structures of metal and glass stretched high into the sky, reflecting the warm orange glow of distant suns. The streets were crowded with all sorts of creatures, tall, short, humanoid, insect-like, and even those whose forms seemed to defy the laws of nature. Alien languages filled the air, a constant hum of voices, some excited, others hurried. But among the bustling crowd, one figure stood out. She was small, barely noticeable, her thin frame draped in tattered clothes that barely protected her from the cold evening breeze. Her skin was a soft shade of violet, her features delicate but weathered by time and hardship. Ilara, as she called herself, moved cautiously through the crowd, her eyes darting around, never lingering too long on anything or anyone. She felt their eyes on her, the whispers behind her back, the judgment that followed her every step. She had been cast out, abandoned by the people who once claimed to care for her. The Velar, her species, were known for their grace, their intelligence, and their telepathic abilities. But Ilara was different. A rare genetic mutation had made her abilities weak, almost useless in the eyes of her people. In a society that valued power and perfection, she had become an outcast. Her journey had begun weeks ago, when her employers, those who had once promised her a place in their world, had thrown her out onto the streets. They said she was a failure, a burden to their work. They had no use for her anymore, and in their cold, calculated way, they had discarded her like a broken tool. Now she had nothing. No home, no family, no hope. The city's streets were unforgiving, and Ilara had learned quickly that the kindness she once knew was not something shared by everyone. People avoided her gaze, crossing the street to avoid standing too close. Children, curious about her strange appearance, would run away when she looked their way. She didn't blame them. After all, what was she? A worthless outcast with no place in the world. She shuffled down an alley, trying to escape the harshness of the world outside. It was cold here, but not as cold as the way she had been treated. She slumped against a wall, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had no money, no food. There was nowhere to go. She closed her eyes and let the weight of the world press against her. For a moment, she thought about giving up. What was the point of continuing? In a world that didn't want her, why fight? Why try to survive? But then she heard something. A voice. "Hey, are you okay?" It was a man's voice. His words were soft but firm, like he was speaking to a wounded animal. Ilara opened her eyes and looked up. Standing before her was a human. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a kind face. His brown hair was messy from the wind, and his clothes were simple, yet practical. He didn't seem afraid of her, though she knew she must look like a wreck. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice weak. She tried to stand but stumbled, still dizzy from hunger and exhaustion. The man knelt down in front of her, his expression gentle but concerned. "You don't look fine. Come on, let me help you." Ilara instinctively pulled back. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers. In fact, she wasn't used to kindness at all. But something about this man's voice, his eyes, made her pause. He wasn't like the others who had looked at her with disdain or pity. There was no judgment in his gaze, only concern. I don't need help," she said, her voice almost a whisper. The man didn't listen. He extended his hand, offering it to her like he had no other choice but to help. His hand was warm, inviting. She hesitated for a long moment, her mind racing. What could he possibly want from her? What could someone like him see in her? But then, in the stillness of the alley, she realized something. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't asking for her to be someone she wasn't. He was simply offering help. With a slow, cautious movement, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, and he helped her stand, supporting her weight when she swayed. "I'm David," he said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "I can't just leave you here. Come with me. I'll help you." Ilara looked at him, her mind spinning with confusion. This wasn't how the world worked. Strangers didn't help people like her. They didn't care. But David's words, his kindness, seemed genuine. There was no ulterior motive in his eyes, no hidden agenda. Maybe she could trust him. Maybe, for once, someone could see her for more than her failure. "I'm Ilara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." David nodded, his smile never wavering. "You're welcome. Now let's get you something to eat and a place to rest. We'll figure things out." As they walked together through the darkening streets, Ilara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a small spark, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different. David led Ilara down the narrow streets of the city, his hand gently supporting her as they moved. The streets were beginning to empty as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ground. The hum of the alien city's bustling daytime activity was slowly replaced by the sounds of distant chatter, the occasional swoosh of air vehicles overhead, and the soft buzz of neon signs flickering to life. Ilara walked beside David, her mind still spinning from the events of the day. The feeling of his hand on her arm was strange, comforting, yet unfamiliar. She wasn't used to kindness, not from a stranger, especially not after everything that had happened. People didn't help people like her. Not in this world. David glanced at her occasionally, as if checking to see if she was okay. She could sense the concern in his eyes, something genuine and warm that made her feel less invisible than she had in weeks. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. "I know this isn't much," David said, breaking the silence, "but I have a small repair shop not far from here. I can get you something to eat and a place to sleep. It's not much, but it's safe." Ilara's steps faltered for a moment. A safe place. She had been thrown out by her own people, left to survive alone on the harsh streets of this alien city. The thought of someone offering her safety, even in a small shop, was almost too much to process. She had learned to trust no one. Yet here was David, offering her something she hadn't had in what felt like forever. "What's the catch?" Ilara asked, her voice cautious. She had learned the hard way that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. David chuckled softly, the sound surprisingly light and reassuring. "No catch. I just can't leave someone out here alone, especially not someone like you." Ilara blinked, confused. "Someone like me?" "Yeah. You're different," David said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. "You're not from around here. I can tell that. But you're a person, right? And you deserve a place to stay." Ilara didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being treated like a person, like someone deserving of kindness. To most, she was nothing more than a failure, a mistake. David led her into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The buildings here were smaller, older, and less crowded. There weren't as many alien merchants or bustling shops. Instead, there were quiet homes, some of them dimly lit from the inside, with gardens and small courtyards that seemed to belong to another world entirely. He stopped in front of a modest building at the end of the street. It was simple but inviting, with a small sign hanging over the door that read "David's Repairs" in bold, simple lettering. "This is it," David said, unlocking the door and holding it open for her. "It's not much, but it's home." Ilara stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The space was small but clean. There were tools and machines scattered around the room, some in various stages of repair. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, but there was a warmth to the place that made her feel a little less cold. David led her to a small corner, where a makeshift cot was set up beside a workbench. A thin blanket was folded neatly on top, and a couple of pillows were stacked at the head. It wasn't much, but it was a bed, something she hadn't had in what felt like an eternity. "Rest here for now," David said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll grab some food. You're probably starving." "Huh." Ilara nodded, though she was too exhausted to say anything. She sat down on the cot, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift off her shoulders. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt safe, let alone cared for. David disappeared into another room and returned a few minutes later with a tray of food. There were simple dishes on the tray: a bowl of soup, some bread, and a small fruit she didn't recognize. The aroma made her stomach growl, and she realized just how hungry she truly was. David set the tray down on a small table beside her and smiled. "Eat up. You need it." Ilara hesitated for a moment, looking at the food. She wasn't used to accepting help, let alone something as simple as a meal. But the smell was irresistible, and her body was desperate for nourishment. Slowly, she picked up the spoon and took a small bite of the soup. The warmth and flavor were unlike anything she had tasted before. It wasn't fancy, but it was comforting. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in so long: hope. David watched her, his gaze kind but not intrusive. He didn't rush her, just let her eat at her own pace. As she finished the meal, Ilara looked up at him, her eyes a little less guarded. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why help me? I'm not like the others." David leaned against the workbench, folding his arms. "Maybe you're not like them," he said, "but you're still a person, and I can't just let you fall through the cracks." Ilara didn't know what to say. She had spent so long thinking of herself as a failure, a problem to be discarded, that hearing someone speak to her like this felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. David smiled warmly, as if it was nothing at all. "You're welcome, Ilara. You're safe here. You can stay as long as you need." The next few days in David's shop were a blur for Ilara. At first, she had spent most of her time resting, too tired and worn from the harshness of the streets to do much else. But as the days passed, something started to change. She had begun to feel a strange sense of calm she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. David was kind but never overbearing. He didn't ask too many questions, just allowed her to adjust at her own pace. When she was ready, he had started showing her the basics of his work: repairing machinery, fixing devices, and tinkering with old tech that came into the shop. She found it fascinating. Though she had never worked with machines before, the soft hum of the tools and the sound of David's quiet instructions had a way of soothing her, making her forget, even if just for a while, the pain of her past. One afternoon, as Ilara sat at the workbench, carefully adjusting a piece of a broken droid, David walked in holding a small package wrapped in plain paper. "I thought you might like to take a break," he said with a smile. "Got something for you." Ilara looked up in surprise. A gift. She wasn't sure how to react. She hadn't received anything, let alone something from a stranger. Slowly, she took the package from David, her hands shaking a little. "Thanks," she said softly, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. David nodded and stepped back, giving her space. "Open it. I think you'll like it." Ilara carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside, she found a small, colorful scarf. The fabric was soft and delicate, with intricate patterns that reminded her of the forests from her home planet, lush greens and deep blues that swirled together like the leaves of a tree. She ran her fingers over the material, feeling its coolness against her skin. "I thought it might remind you of home," David said, as though reading her thoughts. "You can wear it if you want. You don't have to, but I thought it might be something nice for you." Ilara stared at the scarf in her hands, struggling to find the right words. She hadn't realized how much she missed the simple beauty of her home. She had been so focused on surviving, on finding a place in a world that didn't want her, that she had forgotten about the things that used to bring her comfort. The scarf wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder that beauty could still exist, even in the harshest of places. "Thank you," she said again, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. David smiled, his eyes warm. "You're welcome. I'm glad you like it." As the day went on, Ilara felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. And living meant more than just eating and sleeping. It meant feeling something again, something real. Later that evening, David prepared a simple dinner. The meal was small, just a stew with some bread. But Ilara felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the food. After they ate, David sat down across from her at the small table. "So, Ilara," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking about what you told me when we first met." Ilara paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her bowl. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She knew he was talking about her past, the way she had been thrown out by her own people, discarded like trash. "I know it's hard," David continued, his voice kind but firm. "But you don't have to carry that weight alone anymore. You're here now. And I'll do whatever I can to help you. If you want, I can teach you more. I'm sure there's a lot you could do with your skills. You just need someone to show you how." Ilara looked up at him, unsure of what to say. She had spent so long thinking of herself as a failure, someone with no place in the world. The idea that she could actually learn something, become someone with purpose again, was both foreign and frightening. But David's words weren't just empty promises. She could feel his sincerity, his belief in her. "I don't know," Ilara murmured, her voice hesitant. "I've never been good at anything. Not like you. You seem to know exactly what you're doing." David shook his head. "You're wrong about that. No one knows everything, not even me. But that's the beauty of it. We learn as we go. And you're already doing better than you think." Ilara stared at him, unsure of how to respond. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the smallest spark of hope deep inside her. Maybe she wasn't as broken as she had always thought. Maybe with time, she could find a way to rebuild herself. The next day, David gave her a new task. It was simple: fix a small broken device that had been dropped off at the shop. It wasn't much, but to Ilara, it felt like a test, a challenge she wasn't sure she could meet. David showed her the basics, explaining what to do step by step. She hesitated at first, the fear of failure gnawing at her, but she pushed it aside. With steady hands, Ilara took the device apart, following David's instructions carefully. The task was more difficult than she had anticipated, but she didn't give up. Slowly, piece by piece, she reassembled the device. When she finally finished, she handed it to David, her heart racing. David examined the device, his eyes narrowing in focus. He clicked a few buttons, and the machine buzzed to life. "Looks like it works," he said with a grin. "You did it." Ilara couldn't help but smile. It wasn't much, but it was the first thing she had ever fixed. And it was hers. "Thank you," she whispered again, feeling something inside her shift. David nodded, his smile never fading. "You did all the work. I just showed you the way. You're not as lost as you think, Ilara. You just need to believe in yourself." For the first time in a long time, Ilara believed him. And for the first time in a long time, Ilara believed it. As the days turned into weeks, Ilara grew more comfortable in her new life. The strange, overwhelming world of Earth was slowly becoming less frightening. Every task she took on, no matter how small, helped her build a sense of purpose. David's patience and belief in her kept her going. The more she worked with him, the more she realized she was learning things she never thought possible. It wasn't just the machine she was fixing. She was beginning to fix herself, little by little. One day, as Ilara was adjusting a part on a device, David came over with an odd look on his face. His hands were empty, and his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a hint of curiosity. "Ilara," he said, his voice quieter than usual, "I've been thinking. You've learned a lot here, but there's more to life than just fixing things. Maybe it's time for you to explore the world outside. See what else is out there. You deserve more than to just stay in this shop." Ilara looked up from her work, her hands stilling as she tried to understand what David was saying. For the first time, he wasn't talking about machines. He was talking about her. "I've been thinking the same thing," she replied, her voice uncertain. "But I'm not sure I'm ready. The outside world. It's still so big and confusing to me. What if I mess up? What if I fail again?" David placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a reassuring presence in the room. "You won't mess up. You've already proven to yourself that you can learn. And failing, that's just part of growing. You've got nothing to be afraid of. The world won't bite." Ilara couldn't help but smile at his words. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But there was still that part of her, the scared, lost part, that hesitated. What if she wasn't cut out for the world outside? What if she was just destined to be alone, forgotten? David's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're ready, Ilara. You've already taken the first step. And if you ever feel lost, you can always come back here. I'll always be here." She looked at him, her chest tight with emotion. David had done so much for her already. He had given her shelter, food, and a purpose. And now he was giving her the chance to be something more, something she hadn't been in so long, a person who could stand on her own. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. She didn't have the words to explain just how much this meant to her. She had never felt more torn in her life, between the safety she found in David's shop and the fear of the unknown that waited outside. David gave her a warm smile. "I'll always be here. Now go, see the world for yourself. It's waiting for you." Ilara stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Her heart pounded in her chest. But slowly she nodded. David was right. She had to face the world eventually. She had spent far too long hiding behind walls, afraid of what might happen if she stepped out. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Ilara decided to take the first step. She left the small shop, stepping out into the streets of the city. The air felt different today, fresher, more alive. As she walked, she took in everything around her. The busy streets, the people hurrying to and fro, the vehicles passing by. It was a world she hadn't allowed herself to explore until now. She wandered the city for hours, just observing, listening to the hum of life around her. It was overwhelming, but strangely comforting. She didn't speak to anyone, just watched them go about their day, lost in her own thoughts. At one point, she came across a small park. The green of the grass was a welcome sight, and the quiet seemed to invite her to stop and rest. She sat on one of the benches, taking a deep breath. This was new. She was free, yet she still felt like an outsider. She didn't know how to belong in this world. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, you okay?" Ilara looked up to see a young woman standing in front of her. She had dark hair and a kind smile, dressed in casual clothes. The woman's eyes were warm, as if she was genuinely concerned. I think so," Ilara answered slowly. She wasn't sure how to explain the swirl of emotions she was feeling. The woman sat down beside her without hesitation. "I'm Clara. You look a bit lost." "I am," Ilara admitted, her voice soft. "I just never been outside much. I'm not sure how to fit in here." Clara nodded as if she understood. "It's hard, isn't it? This world can be a lot to take in. But you don't have to face it alone. Everyone feels lost at some point." Ilara felt a flicker of hope in her chest. Could it really be that simple? Could the world be a place where she didn't have to be afraid? "You're not alone," Clara added with a smile. "There's a lot of good out there. You just have to give it a chance." Ilara looked at her, surprised by how easy it was to talk to this stranger. Maybe she didn't have to be afraid. Maybe the world wasn't as bad as she had once thought. Over the next few weeks, Ilara began to spend more time outside. With each new step, she grew a little braver. The world was still big, still full of unknowns, but it didn't feel so cold anymore. The more she explored, the more she realized she didn't need to be afraid of the unknown. Life was full of opportunities, and she was ready to embrace them. David had been right all along. She had nothing to fear. And with each passing day, she grew stronger, more certain that the world outside was a place she could belong. As days passed, Ilara found herself exploring more of the city. Each new place she visited brought new experiences, and although the world was still unfamiliar, it no longer felt as terrifying. With Clara's encouragement, she began to meet people and learn about Earth's culture, customs, and the way humans interacted with each other. One sunny afternoon, Ilara was walking through a busy marketplace. The colors, sounds, and smells filled the air, overwhelming her senses. She had never seen so many people in one place before. The stalls were overflowing with fruits, vegetables, and handmade crafts, while people laughed and chatted, exchanging goods and stories. It was a bustling, vibrant place, yet Ilara felt oddly out of place. She stood on the edge of the market, unsure of where to begin or how to fit in. Suddenly, a loud voice broke through her thoughts. "Hey, watch out." Before Ilara could react, something small and soft collided with her. She stumbled backward, startled, but caught herself just in time. Looking down, she saw a small, fluffy bundle of fur. It was a puppy, its big brown eyes staring up at her with confusion. "Sorry," a voice called from behind her. A young man rushed over, kneeling beside the puppy. He was tall with messy brown hair and a carefree smile. His clothes were simple, and he had a kind, friendly demeanor. He gently scooped up the puppy in his arms, cradling it protectively. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes meeting Ilara's. Ilara blinked, surprised by his kindness. She nodded, still unsure of how to respond. "I'm fine," she said softly, glancing at the puppy in his arms. "Is this your dog?" The young man smiled and shook his head. "No, this little troublemaker belongs to my neighbor. I was just taking him for a walk. He tends to get a little too excited." Ilara couldn't help but smile at the puppy, who was now licking the man's face as if nothing had happened. It was an odd sight, yet it made her feel at ease. The man's warmth and the puppy's innocent joy brought a sense of comfort she hadn't expected. "I'm Ilara," she said, introducing herself, her voice still a little hesitant. "I'm Ben," he replied with a grin. "Nice to meet you, Ilara." For a few moments, they stood there, watching the puppy wriggle in Ben's arms, clearly trying to escape for another round of mischief. Ilara felt a quiet bond forming between them, a connection she hadn't anticipated. Ben set the puppy down, and it immediately began darting around the market, sniffing everything in sight. Ben chuckled and shook his head. "He's got a lot of energy. But hey, if you're ever interested in meeting more animals, I can introduce you to my neighbor's pets. They've got all sorts of creatures." Ilara's eyes lit up at the thought. Back on her home planet, she had seen strange and beautiful creatures, but she had never really interacted with them. Here on Earth, it seemed like animals were a big part of people's lives. "I'd like that," she replied, her voice more confident now. "I've always been curious about Earth's animals. They're so different from the ones I know." Ben smiled warmly. "I can show you around sometime. I know a few places where you can meet all kinds of creatures. Big ones, small ones, furry ones, and even some you might not expect." Ilara was surprised by how easy it was to talk to Ben. He didn't seem to judge her for being different. He was just kind, treating her as if she belonged, like everyone else. Over the next few weeks, Ilara found herself spending more time with Ben. They would go to the park together, watching the animals and talking about their lives. Ben was easygoing and fun to be around, and Ilara quickly grew fond of his company. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that there were people in this world who didn't see her as an outsider. One day, Ben invited Ilara to his apartment to meet his neighbor's animals. Ilara was both nervous and excited. She had never been to someone's home before, and the idea of meeting new animals made her heart race. When they arrived, Ben led her inside, and she was immediately greeted by a variety of creatures. There were birds in cages, small rabbits hopping around, and even a few exotic pets that Ben's neighbor had collected over the years. Ilara's eyes widened as she took in the sight. She had never seen anything like this before. "This is amazing," Ilara said, her voice full of wonder. "I've never seen so many different animals in one place." Ben grinned. "I told you they were cool, right?" As they spent the afternoon getting to know the animals, Ilara began to feel a sense of belonging. She was still learning about Earth and its people, but moments like these made her feel like she was finally finding her place. She didn't need to be afraid anymore. The world wasn't as cold and unwelcoming as she had once believed. In fact, it was full of people like Ben, kind-hearted individuals who helped others and made them feel valued. Ilara sat down on the floor, a small rabbit hopping into her lap. She stroked its soft fur, a peaceful smile crossing her face. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt truly at ease. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said softly, more to herself than to Ben. "I never thought I'd feel at home." Ben, who had been watching her with a thoughtful expression, nodded. "Sometimes it takes a while to find where you belong. But when you do, you'll know. And I'm glad you're starting to see that." Ilara smiled, grateful for his words. She was no longer the lonely, scared alien who had been thrown out onto the streets. She was someone with friends, with purpose, and with the chance to build a new life, a life she was ready to embrace. As the day drew to a close, Ilara stood up, feeling a renewed sense of hope. The world was still big, still full of surprises, but now she knew she wasn't facing it alone. The weeks passed quickly, and with each day, Ilara's confidence grew. She had learned to navigate Earth's busy streets, to shop in the local markets, and even to enjoy simple pleasures like walking through the park or spending time with animals. But most importantly, she had found a sense of community, something she had never expected. It was in the little moments with Ben, Clara, and even the strangers who greeted her with a smile that Ilara felt the world was not so harsh. One afternoon, as Ilara sat in the cafe where she and Clara often met, she looked out the window, watching people walk by. There were so many different faces, so many different stories, and yet they all seemed to be moving forward, each person caught in their own journey. It made Ilara realize something important. She had been thrown out, rejected, and treated as though she had no value. But now, she was building a life for herself, one step at a time. She wasn't the alien cast aside. She was Ilara, a person with hopes, dreams, and a future she was starting to shape for herself. The world hadn't been easy on her, but she was learning to navigate it in her own way. Her thoughts were interrupted when Ben walked into the cafe. His warm smile greeted her, and he waved as he made his way to the table. "Hey there," Ben said as he slid into the seat across from her. "How's your day been so far?" Ilara smiled, feeling an unexpected warmth in her chest. "It's been good. I've been thinking about how much things have changed." Ben raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Changed how?" Ilara glanced out the window again, then back at him. "When I first arrived here, I felt lost. I didn't know anyone, and everything was so different. But now, I feel like I'm becoming part of something. I'm not just an outsider anymore. I'm part of this world, and that's a good feeling." Ben smiled, a proud look crossing his face. "I'm glad to hear that. You've come a long way, Ilara. You've made a place for yourself here, and you've done it all on your own." Ilara shook her head. "No, I didn't do it alone. I've had you and Clara. And the people here, they've been kind, even when I didn't know how to fit in." Ben reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "But you made the choice to be part of this world. That's the hardest part, and you did it." Ilara smiled, grateful for his words. She had always thought of herself as someone who didn't belong. But now, she could see that it wasn't about being alien or different. It was about finding the courage to take chances, to trust others, and to open herself to the possibilities that life offered. Over the next few days, Ilara continued to explore new paths. She volunteered at a local animal shelter, helping take care of stray animals that had been abandoned or hurt. It wasn't an easy task, but Ilara found it rewarding. The animals, just like her, needed someone to care for them, and she had the capacity to give that care. The shelter became a second home for her. She spent her free time there, building connections with the staff and the animals. Each day, she felt more connected to the world around her, more rooted in Earth's rhythms. She had learned that it wasn't the grand gestures that made a difference. It was the little things, the kindness, the patience, the willingness to help that truly mattered. One afternoon, while cleaning out the cages in the shelter, Ilara found herself thinking about her family back on her home planet. She missed them dearly, and she wondered what they were doing, if they even knew where she was. Her thoughts were interrupted when Clara entered the room, a concerned look on her face. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, her voice soft but filled with understanding. "You've been quiet today." Ilara paused, glancing at Clara. "I was just thinking about home," she admitted. "I miss my family. I wonder if they ever wonder about me." Clara nodded. "I'm sure they do. But you've made a new family here, Ilara. People who care about you, who see you for who you are." Ilara smiled at her words. Clara had always been there for her, supporting her even when Ilara doubted herself. It was true. She had made a new life here, with people who cared. She was no longer a stranger in this world. Later that evening, Ben invited Ilara to a small gathering at his apartment. A few of his friends would be there, and he thought it would be a good opportunity for Ilara to meet more people. Though she was a bit nervous, Ilara agreed, knowing that this was another step in her journey toward fitting in. When she arrived at Ben's place, she was greeted with smiles and laughter. The atmosphere was warm, filled with easy conversation and good food. Ilara found herself talking to a young woman named Sarah, who worked as a teacher. They discussed the differences between Earth's education system and the one Ilara was familiar with on her home planet. It was a conversation that made Ilara feel like she had a place in this world. Her knowledge and perspective were valued. As the night went on, Ilara realized something important. She had stopped thinking of herself as the alien who didn't belong. She was now a part of a community, a small, supportive group of people who accepted her, who understood her. They didn't see her as an outsider. They saw her as someone who had something to offer, someone worth caring about. When Ilara returned home that night, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in a long time. She had come so far since she first arrived on Earth, and while there was still much for her to learn, she knew that she was no longer lost. She had found her place, and as she lay down to sleep, she realized that maybe for the first time in her life, she had a home, right here, among the people who had opened their hearts to her. Months passed since Ilara first arrived on Earth. With each day, she grew stronger, more confident, and more connected to the people around her. She had found a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. It was early one morning when Ilara stood on the balcony of her small apartment, looking out over the city. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow over the skyline. She breathed in deeply, letting the fresh morning air fill her lungs. Life on Earth had become her life. She was no longer the alien that had been discarded. She was a person, an individual with a story, with her own future to shape. As she sipped her coffee, her thoughts drifted to the friends she had made over the past few months. Ben, Clara, and even Sarah had become an important part of her life. They had shown her that kindness and understanding weren't limited to just one species or one planet. Human beings were capable of great compassion, and they had shared that with her without hesitation. Ben had become like a brother to her. Their friendship had deepened over time, and he had always been there to offer advice or simply listen when she needed it. Clara, too, had been a constant presence in her life. The two of them often spent hours together, talking about everything from trivial things to deep personal matters. Ilara had also started to contribute more to the community. She volunteered at the animal shelter nearly every day, taking care of the animals that had no place to go. It was hard work, but it brought her peace. Each dog and cat she cared for reminded her that everyone deserved a chance to be loved, just as she had been. Despite all of this, Ilara still carried the weight of her past with her. She couldn't help but wonder what had become of her people. Were they still searching for her? Did they even care? Those questions lingered in her mind from time to time, but she no longer let them define her. She had a new life now, one that she was building with her own hands. One day, as Ilara walked through the park, she received an unexpected message. It was from Ben, asking if she could meet him at the cafe in an hour. Curious, Ilara agreed, and soon found herself sitting across from him, wondering what he had to say. "You seem nervous," Ben observed, a smile on his face. "Relax, it's nothing bad. I promise." Ilara laughed nervously, grateful for Ben's calming presence. "I'm just not used to surprises anymore." Ben leaned in, his eyes filled with excitement. "I have something to show you. A gift, actually." Ilara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A gift? From you?" Ben nodded, his smile widening. "Yep. I think you'll like it." A few minutes later, Ben handed her a small, carefully wrapped box. Ilara took it, her curiosity growing with each passing second. When she opened it, her eyes widened in surprise. Inside the box was a beautiful necklace. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but there was something special about it. The pendant was a small, polished stone that shimmered in the light. It was a soft blue color, like the sky at dawn, and Ilara could feel its warmth in her hands. "This is from Earth," Ben explained. "It's a symbol of new beginnings. The stone represents the connection between you and this world. I thought you might like to have it." Ilara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had never expected anything like this. The gesture was simple, but it meant more to her than words could express. It was as if Ben was acknowledging everything she had been through, everything she had accomplished. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you, Ben. This means so much to me." Ben smiled softly. "I know you've had a tough journey, Ilara, but you've come so far. This is just a small token to remind you that you're not alone. You're part of this world now." Ilara placed the necklace around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle comfortably against her skin. For the first time, she felt truly connected to the planet she now called home. It wasn't just a place she had come to. It was her home, too. Later that evening, as Ilara sat quietly in her apartment, she thought about everything that had happened since her arrival on Earth. She had come here alone, cast aside by her own people, rejected and forgotten. But through hard work, patience, and the kindness of others, she had built a life for herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had a future to look forward to. And she had people who cared about her. There was no greater gift than that. As the days went on, Ilara continued to find her place. She worked at the animal shelter, volunteered in the community, and spent time with the people who had become her family. And with each passing day, she grew stronger, more confident in the knowledge that she had found a home, right here on Earth. In the end, Ilara realized that no matter where she came from or how she had arrived, she had been given something that was more important than anything else: the chance to start over. She wasn't just an alien, an outsider, or a stranger. She was a person, someone with dreams, someone with a future, and she was ready to embrace it.